exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
And welcome once again to On the Money. I'm Liam Halligan. For the next hour, we're discussing not so much the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but the escalating economic war between Russia and the West. With a 40-mile convoy outside the Ukrainian capital, the focus is rightly on the Russian military and the humanitarian aspects of this battle. But war involves economic weapons and economic fallout, even for those far away. East-West war. What should you do and what should the government do to limit the damage? On the Money, after the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The UK has stepped up sanctions against Russia, banning now all ships with any connection to the country from entering British ports. The Prime Minister is currently in Poland meeting the Polish Prime Minister and British troops, says Russia's president is using barbaric and indiscriminate tactics against civilians. Boris Johnson says evidence of President Putin's attacks on civilians could be used in a future trial at The Hague.
Vladimir Putin is prepared to use barbaric and indiscriminate tactics against innocent civilians, to bomb tower blocks, to send missiles into tower blocks, to kill children, as we're seeing in increasing numbers.
Meanwhile, Ukraine is facing another day of heavy bombardment, with the mayor of Mariupol saying the port city is constantly being shelled. The Foreign Ministry has also released videos showing a missile hitting a government building in the second biggest city, Kharkiv, this morning. The government says at least 10 people were killed and 35 were wounded in the rocket strikes by Russian forces in the city centre today. Satellite images show a Russian military convoy stretching for an estimated 40 miles now northwest of the capital, Kiev. Craters can also be seen at military airbase, and an oil terminal was damaged after being hit by Russian missiles. The UK's Ministry of Defence says Russia has made actually little progress on its advance on the capital in the last 24 hours. The International Criminal Court says it's going to open an investigation into possible war crimes. Amnesty International says cluster bombs hit a nursery last week, and Ukraine's ambassador to the US says Russia had used vacuum bombs. Both are banned under the Geneva Convention. In an address to the European Parliament, Ukraine's president accused Russia of targeting civilians.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians. We have a desire to see our children alive. I think it's a fair one. Yesterday, 16 children were killed. again and again, President Putin is going to say that is some kind of operation and we are hitting a military infrastructure. Where are our children? What kind of military factories do they work at? What tanks are they going with?
Russia's foreign minister has hit out at the sanctions against Moscow. The EU ban on Russian flights meant that Sergei Lavrov was unable to travel to Geneva for the UN Human Rights Council. He appeared remotely instead. Well, in protest, diplomats from the EU, Britain and the US walked out as he was introduced as the next speaker.
Members of the European Union have chosen a unilateral path of illegitimate sanctions, using them to evade a direct, honest, face-to-face dialogue, which they clearly apprehend. The situation in the world is not getting any easier. It is deteriorating. The main reason for this is that the US and its allies continue to aggressively impose the so-called rules-based world order.
More Western companies are pulling out of Russia, with Shell joining BP, selling its stake in all joint ventures with Gazprom. Walt Disney is among several major Hollywood entertainment companies to pause film releases in Russia. Well, that group includes Sony Pictures and also Warner Brothers, who've decided not to air the Batman in the country from Thursday. Now, in other news now, of course, the situation in Ukraine is developing and we will keep you up to date on the developments when we get them here. But let's take a look at what else is happening today. The Queen's held her first virtual audiences since testing positive with coronavirus. The head of state met with the ambassadors from Andorra and Chad via video link from Windsor Castle. It's after the monarch was forced to postpone her engagements last week. The UK government's being accused of adding to the cost of living crisis following the biggest rise in rail fares for nearly a decade. From today, ticket prices in England and Wales are 3.8% more expensive. The Campaign for Better Transport says the hike couldn't come at a worse time for commuters. Meanwhile, there's travel disruption in the capital, London. A significantly reduced tube service is running after all of the lines were initially suspended this morning. Thousands of underground workers are striking over jobs, pensions and conditions. Another 24 walkout is scheduled to take place on Thursday, and there'll be knock-on effects on the rest of the service for the week. You're now up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head to Liam for On the Money.
Coming up on The Money today, we're talking Russia-Ukraine. Not so much the military conflict during this hour, but the economic standoff instead. A financial and commercial conflict that's not Russia versus Ukraine, but Russia against the West. As oil and gas prices keep rising, the RAC says prices on the forecourt have hit another new record high. And with household utility bills going up in April already, we ask a specialist plumber and a leading net zero skeptic MP. What should you do and what should the government do to keep bills as low as possible? Plus, for today's Money Talks, I discuss the cost of living squeeze in the context of this East-West conflict with Tory former Minister Steve Baker.
Huge issue. It's a huge issue for every MP, I think, and it's a huge issue for my constituents. I'm sorry to say the food bank in Wickham has become something of an industrial operation. And, you know, that is shaming on the whole welfare state, not just this government. And
we also spoke about why the government's net zero agenda is going too fast in Steve Baker's view, not least in these uncertain times. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're at it. So stay with us. This is GB News on television and DAB plus digital radio. I'm Liam Halligan. You're On the Money. Now, satellite images show a 40-mile long Russian convoy near the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. As this Russia-Ukraine conflict escalates, the economic war's also cranking up between Russia and the West. The ruble's crashed at least 30%, in part due to Western sanctions, denting the savings of ordinary Russians and piling pressure on Vladimir Putin. Oil's meanwhile bounced back above $100 a barrel this morning, pushing up petrol and diesel costs here in the UK. The RAC says petrol is now £1.51 a litre on average, with diesel at £1.55, both record highs. The Anglo-Dutch oil giant Shell is following BP in severing links with Russia. Shell selling its stake in the Nord Stream gas pipeline, which crosses the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany, while offloading multi-billion-pound interests in the massive Sakhalin offshore gas project in Russia's Far East. That will rile Russia, increasing the chance Moscow could divert its huge oil and gas exports away from Europe, using new pipelines to China instead. That means as this conflict continues, the cost of living is likely to rise as well, and energy prices in particular. Now, today marks the start of spring, but also, nice present, the highest increase in train fares for 9 years in England and Wales, a 3.8% increase. And if diesel and electricity prices go up even more on global markets, train running costs and fares will surely follow. Big hikes in utility bills are already coming in April. As long as Russia and Ukraine are in conflict, this East-West economic war will continue, which could push up household fuel bills even more. So what should the government do? And what should we do personally to keep our fuel and energy costs down as much as we can? That's our On the Money question today. East-West economic war. How do we limit the damage? As ever here on The Money, grown-up conversations with people who really know their stuff. I'm delighted to be joined today by the Conservative MP for South Thanet, Craig McKinley, who's one of the leading members of the Net Zero Scrutiny Group on the Tory backbenches across the House of Commons, actually. We also welcome back to On the Money Ian Henderson, the founder of Boiler Plan UK, a boiler installation and repair finance service. And one of our regular panellists is Victoria Scholar, who's Head of Investment at Interactive Investor. Victoria, great to have you with us back in the studio. Victoria, let's go to you first, actually. Tell us about what's happening on those global markets. I saw oil went up above $100 a barrel again today. Gas prices are also up.
Yeah, so we are seeing that surge in oil price, Brent crude, the global benchmark, pushing back above $100 a barrel. There were already very tight conditions in the markets after COVID. We've seen a huge surge in demand while supply has been relatively constrained. Now we're adding geopolitical tensions into the mix and the price looks as though it could potentially go higher. Similarly, we're seeing sharp rises in the gas market. UK gas prices in terms of the futures market, when I last checked, was up about 11% just today. So that gives you a sense of the pressure that we're seeing in the commodities complex. Now, in terms of equities, it's been interesting to see...
So share prices, yeah?
So share prices, it's been really interesting to see this divergence globally that started to come about in the last 24 hours, where European markets are pushing lower while the US and Asia are actually trying to recover. We've seen a recovery in the tech stocks stateside, so it really highlights that this is becoming more of a problem that's really going to weigh on Europe rather than a global issue necessarily.
Because the rest of the world is in a sort of post-COVID economic bounce back, right? As lockdowns lifted around the world, we should be in that V-shaped recovery, yet Europe is marred and dragged down by this conflict. Very interesting, Victoria. We'll come back to you. Craig McKinley, great to have you on the show as ever. Now, I mentioned you are one of a number of MPs, not just Tory MPs. You've got other members as well in the Net Zero Scrutiny Group. Look, how serious does this conflict have to get before the government starts retreating from this net zero agenda?
Well, that's the question I'm certainly asking at the moment. We've been discussing for months the cost of energy. And we know what's going to hit the doormats on the 1st of April. That's already hitting the doormats of businesses who don't have the price cap sort of relief, such as that's available to householders. Now, we need a serious discussion about energy provision in the UK. We're sort of 20 years out of date here. We've allowed our nuclear power reactors to be turned off. The remaining sort of 4 of the advanced gas-cooled reactors get turned off by 2028. That's despite them having an extension of their life. And the new one at Hinkley C won't be ready and on stream till the early 2030s. So if we think we've got an energy crisis now, it's going to get worse at the end of this decade. Now, of course, I've been pushing for a domestic supply because domestic supply at least gives you security of energy, hopefully lower prices, and also we need more storage facilities. All of these things we've allowed to go downhill over a very, very long period. There's a quite a remarkable graph that the House of Commons Library produced on the 14th of January. And to me, it shows the problem only too clearly. At the early 2000s, we were marginal net exporters of gas. We have reduced our gas production by 55% since then. And you have this very big V-shaped triangle in the middle, which is imports. Now, perversely, this Putin's war has been financed by the West because we have been buying his gas, oil, coal and raw materials to the tune of $100 billion per year. That's twice his defence budget. So perversely, we have laid the foundations, giving him the money for the armed forces and the weapons of destruction that we're now seeing wreaking havoc across the Ukraine. We have a solution in the UK. We're sitting on the solution. It's in the North Sea, and particularly it's the potential for frack gas. And we've seen how that has been completely dynamic in the US market over the last 15 years while they've really ramped up their frack gas production. And it's perverse, isn't it? We had the young men saving Europe in the Second World War. We've now got American LNG tankers coming to the salvation of Europe because we have created largely for ourselves this gas emergency. We're now in a situation where prices are hiking and there's going to be supply issues. Now, what are we going to do? What is Putin going to do?
Kinley, one moment. Craig, I just want to go to Ian Henderson. I will come back to you if there's time. Apologies. Ian, so you're the founder of Boiler Plan UK. You're installing boilers and repair and so on. It seems that pretty much every household is going to have to get rid of their gas-fired boiler and move to a heat pump. Is that viable, Ian?
Well, it isn't viable for every household in the UK, and the issue is who pays for that. The price of replacing a gas boiler compared to replacing a heat pump is a considerable difference, around about £10,000 to replace it.
Ian, hold that thought. I apologise. We've got some breaking news. We have to go live to the House of Commons, where Home Secretary Priti Patel is giving an update on the situation in Ukraine.
Appointments and walk-ins across every location. Should more capacity be required, we will, of course, deliver it. And, Mr. Speaker, I should also add at this stage as well, we have our rapid deployment teams already in the region. And, in fact, the FCDO sent them in a few weeks ago to support this whole effort. I've also removed the usual language requirements and salary thresholds to come to the UK to be with their family members. And where family members of British nationals do not meet the usual eligibility criteria, but do pass all security checks, we will give them permission to enter the UK outside the usual rules for 12 months. This means that British nationals and any person settled in the UK can bring over immediate Ukrainian family members. Through this policy alone, an additional 100,000 Ukrainians could be eligible to come to the UK and access work and public services. There is no limit on the numbers eligible under this route, Mr. Speaker. Anyone in the Ukraine intending to apply under the family migration route should contact the dedicated 24-hour Home Office line for assistance before applying. Ukrainian nationals already in the UK have been given the option to switch free of charge to a points-based immigration route or a family visa route. Visas for Ukrainian temporary workers in some sectors are being extended so that they can stay until at least the 31st of December this year. As I said yesterday, I've heard some members calling for visa waivers. With Russian troops are seeking to infiltrate and merge with Ukrainian forces. Extremists are on the ground in the region too.
Listen to the statement, for goodness sake.
Mr. Speaker, I'll continue, and perhaps the opposite party members, I'll take their questions later on, but I actually do want to emphasise the seriousness of the security situation on the ground, and that is not something that can be discounted lightly at all, Mr. Speaker. Extremists are on the ground, and they are in the region too, and I'm sure if the party opposite wanted a security briefing from our colleagues, we'd happily provide one, but at the same time, I'm very sceptical of how they treat and respect security advice. Given this, and also with Putin's willingness to do violence on British soil, and in keeping with our approach, which we have retained consistently throughout all emergency activations, including that in Afghanistan, we cannot suspend any security or biometric checks on people we welcome to our country. We have a collective duty to keep the British people safe, and this approach is based on the strongest security advice. Mr. Speaker, these measures have been designed to enable swift implementation, and that is the point, swift implementation, without the need for legislation or changes to immigration rules. The Ukrainian people need help immediately, and we are bringing this in place now. As outlined by the Prime Minister earlier today, I can also set out phase 2 of our bespoke humanitarian support package for the people of Ukraine. Firstly, we are establishing an expansive Ukrainian family scheme so that British nationals and people settled in the UK can bring a wider group of family members to the UK, extending eligibility to parents, grandparents, adult offspring, siblings, and their immediate family members. Again, the scheme will be free. Those joining family in the UK will be granted leave for an initial period of 12 months. They will be able to work and access public funds. Secondly, we will establish a humanitarian sponsorship pathway, which will open up a route to the UK for Ukrainians who may not have family ties with the UK, but who are able to match with individuals, charities, businesses and community groups. Those who come under this scheme will also be granted leave for an initial period of 12 months, and they will be able to work and have access to public services. The Home Office will work closely with all our international partners on the ground to ensure that displaced Ukrainians that are in need of a home are supported. My colleague, the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, will work with the devolved administrations to ensure that those who want to sponsor an individual or a family can volunteer and be matched quickly with Ukrainians in need. There will be no numerical limit on this scheme, and we will welcome as many Ukrainians as wish to come and have matched sponsors. Making a success of the new humanitarian sponsorship pathway will require a national effort from the entire country. And Mr. Speaker, our country will rise to that challenge. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, this is a very generous and it is an expansive and unprecedented package. It will mean that the British public and the Ukrainian diaspora can support displaced Ukrainians in the UK until they are able to return to a free and a sovereign Ukraine. We are striking a blow for democracy and freedom against tyranny. Above all, we are doing right by the courageous people of Ukraine. We will help British nationals and their families to get out of Ukraine safely. We will support our displaced Ukrainian friends. We will respond robustly to Russian threats here in the UK. We, Mr. Speaker, will not back down. We will do what is right. And, Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Shall the Home Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People's homes in Kharkiv have been shelled, children have been killed, and Russian tanks are rolling in now on Kyiv. And the Ukrainian people are showing immense courage and resolve in the face of a despot and in the face of unparalleled aggression. And we need to do our bit to support them alongside sanctions, alongside the equipment assistance. That also means being prepared to do our bit to provide sanctuary as well. Families are being split up, often fathers and older children staying to fight, mothers, grandparents and younger children leaving to find safety and sanctuary. And many of those families want to stay close by to home, but for those who want to travel to the UK to seek shelter with family or friends and get the support they need at this dreadful time, we must be ready to help, and we must be ready to do our bit alongside other countries, as we have done in generations past, to give sanctuary to those fleeing war in Europe. We have been calling repeatedly on the government to do more to help, and there will be considerable relief that the government has now changed its position and accepted we must do more. And in particular, I am glad the government now appears to have completely changed its policy in response to our calls to help elderly parents and wider family members. And I'm glad that they have listened not just to those in this House, but across the country, and most importantly of all, to Ukrainians and their families. But I have many questions about how this will actually work and how many people in practice it will help. And I am concerned about the way the Home Office has handled this, but those are issues for another day. We start with the family issues. We are very glad to know that Valentina Klimova in Paris can now come to join her daughter, having been initially refused. But can I ask her, she has had to pay around £700 to apply for visas, having been initially turned down. Can you confirm that that money will be refunded to her and that nobody will have to pay if they are seeking sanctuary from Ukraine? The statement also says, her statement says that elderly parents, siblings and adult children will now be included in the family visa. Does that include stepchildren? I have been contacted by someone, for example, desperate to get his stepdaughter and granddaughter into the country. And what about a young mum with her children who has left the rest of her family in Ukraine? Can she come and stay with her uncle and aunt? Are uncles and aunts included? Does the sponsoring family member have to be British or have to have indefinite leave to remain? What about Ukrainians here on work visas, on study visas, who come maybe as lorry drivers or on visitor visas? Surely she is not expecting to turn their families away. When people are fleeing Russian authoritarianism and war, I assume she will not be applying a test based on which bureaucratic box UK residents tick. So can she make a simple commitment now that family members from Ukraine who are fleeing persecution are all welcome here in the UK, no matter what visa their family member here in the UK has? We will give them sanctuary. And what about people who have been given the chance to stay with friends? We know most people want to stay near Ukraine, but what about someone who has left all their family behind, but maybe used to work or study here in Britain? Can they come and get sanctuary? Is there a route for them? If the only route is the community route, I'm concerned that that will take a long time. Has the government considered an emergency humanitarian or protection visa, for example, that could still include all the significant security and biometric checks she has talked about, but could swiftly be done and go broader than family members too? Can she also tell us about this community sponsorship scheme? The existing community sponsorship scheme, this is very welcome, it's very important, but the existing scheme takes a long time. It requires people to meet a whole series of tests in order to be able to sponsor a refugee. Requires considerable fundraising. I'm sure many people will want to be involved in it, but I know many people who have been deterred in the past by how complex the system is. So far, it has only helped around 500 people resettle over a period of 5 years. That's around 100 a year. So can she tell us how many people she is expecting to be able to be helped and what action she will take to speed up that system to make sure it gets proper support? I can see that it is not a resettlement scheme. It does not appear to have active government support. Can I ask her why there are no proposals for a resettlement scheme as part of this statement, and whether she has looked at that, and what plans there are to go further and provide a resettlement scheme in addition to community sponsorship? And finally ask her about the figures that she has raised, the 100,000 or the 200,000 figures that she's raised. I've not been able to find anybody who can make sense or explain the source of those figures, so perhaps she could explain to us how many people in practice she thinks will come and how those figures have been calculated. It is really important that the government has accepted we need to do more. We have a huge responsibility to work alongside other European countries to provide sanctuary to those who are fleeing war in Europe. But we must make sure that that actually happens in practice, and that bureaucratic hurdles, that delays, that obstacles do not get in the way of people showing the support across the country that they want to show for those who have fled the appalling fighting in Ukraine. We have all made pledges, all of us, to stand by Ukraine. We must do that in providing sanctuary now.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to recognise that the British government is the first government to actually outline some practical measures in terms of how we are bringing people to the United Kingdom. It is actually true. It is true in terms of the specific schemes that we have outlined today, and either the party opposite are interested and want to listen to how. If I may, Mr. Speaker, I think rather than making cheap political points from the benches opposite, this is a moment when everyone should be coming together in our national interest, but also to provide a good deal of help and support. So, if I may, Mr. Speaker, In response, first of all, to some of the points the Honourable Lady has made, this is a family scheme. So she's asked about stepchildren. It is a family scheme, and on that basis, a Ukrainian family scheme. So family members, and I've already outlined some of the categories, will be eligible to come over to the United Kingdom, and the scheme will be free. She's also mentioned about the lady that has paid fees. All fees for schemes will not be put in place. If there's a refund that needs to be provided, that will also be provided. I think while I have the floor, Mr. Speaker, it might be worth me outlining some practical measures, actually, for all colleagues. Yesterday in the House, I said that MPs should not get themselves directly involved in caseworking. As of tomorrow, just to guide the Honourable Lady as well to help in response to her questions, the Home Office will be providing a team based in Portcullis House where MPs can directly refer cases in addition to the helpline.
Home Secretary Priti Patel there talking to MPs in the House of Commons, outlining the UK's policy towards Ukrainians fleeing conflict in their country. Response from Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary. There'll be full political analysis of that later here on GB News, not least with our political editor Darren McCaffrey and political correspondent Tom Harwood. Let's go back to that panel. We were talking to you, Ian Henderson. We were talking about the impact of this conflict on not just household fuel bills, but also the cost of living in general. And you run a specialist plumbing company. I was asking you what you made of the rules coming in that ordinary householders are going to have to replace their gas boilers pretty soon with heat pumps. Is that feasible? What is the cost going to be? Do you get a sense that because of this conflict and rising household utility costs, there could be some delay in that government requirement?
Yeah, so I think heat pumps definitely have a role to play in how we'll heat our homes in the future. They're not going to be a silver bullet that solves the problem. Currently in the UK, we do not have a viable alternative to gas boilers. There are many different alternatives. Heat pumps will be more expensive to fit. That's a fact. They'll be around about, the average cost to fit a heat pump is around £10,000. But they are very useful for properties off the gas grid, such as oil and electric heating. And the government are putting together a generous scheme of a £5,000 contribution towards having a heat pump fitted from April. But that will not solve this problem. Gas boilers are here to stay. We are removing them from our new build properties. However, there's 20 million homes in the UK run from a gas boiler. And currently there is no viable alternative to that. The alternative that we see in the heating industry lies around hydrogen gas. But hydrogen gas has much wider use case than just for heating our homes. The issues we have right now are that we can't generate enough green hydrogen at the right price, and the gas network isn't ready to be repurposed. It will be ready in the late 2020s. But right now, there is no viable alternative to gas boilers.
Ian, regular On the Money viewers will know all about green hydrogen. We're going to come to back to that debate. I want to give the last word to Craig McKinley, your response to Ian's statement on gas boilers. But just before we go to you, Craig, briefly, Victoria, I'm sorry our discussion's been truncated, but I wanted to just get some comment from you on the Russian companies listed on the London Stock Exchange. There are 31 of them. How are they faring?
We've seen a lot of volatility for Russian companies or companies linked to Russia on the FTSE 100, like Evraz, which is a mining giant that's backed by Roman Abramovich, the billionaire who owns Chelsea, of course. Polymetal is another one. We've seen huge volatility in these stocks. And on our platform at Interactive Investor, we've seen a combination of panic selling, understandably, amid that uncertainty, but there's also been opportunistic buying as well. So that's why we're seeing...
Because these companies still have a lot of stuff, don't they? They still have lots of commodities backing them.
They do, and people are thinking, is this the end of the selling? Are we...
And will they be sanctioned? Will they be sanctioned? Briefly, Craig McKinley, sorry our discussion's been truncated. Gas boilers being removed in British homes, 20 million of them. Will it happen?
Well, I think Ian's laid out some of the practicalities. There aren't enough fitters. If they rely on a huge electricity supply, which we don't have, And the gas is convenient. It's something that 20 million people enjoy. It works. It's off and onable. So I can't see that that's going anytime soon. And we have to have that debate, who's going to pay for this massive infrastructure.
We certainly do. That debate will happen here on The Money. Craig McKinley, Tory MP for Thanet South, one of the MP's net scrutiny group in the House of Commons. Thank you so much for joining us. Also, Ian Henderson of Boiler Plan UK. You'll be coming back on The Money. Look forward to that. And indeed, Victoria Scholar of Interactive Investor. Thank you as ever. This is On The Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, it's today's Money Talks interview with former Minister Steve Baker on the cost of living crisis in the context of this East-West conflict. But first, the GB News headlines once more with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The UK has stepped up sanctions against Russia, banning all ships with any connection to the country from entering British ports. The Prime Minister, who's currently in Poland meeting his counterpart, says evidence of President Putin's attacks on civilians could be used in a...
Vladimir Putin is prepared to use barbaric and indiscriminate tactics against innocent civilians, to bomb tower blocks, to send missiles into tower blocks, to kill children, as we're seeing in increasing numbers.
Ukraine is facing another day of heavy bombardment. The Foreign Ministry has released video showing a missile hitting a government building in Kharkiv. The Interior Ministry says at least 10 people have been killed in rocket attacks in the city today. The International Criminal Court says it will open an investigation into possible war crimes. Amnesty International says cluster bombs hit a nursery last week, and Ukraine's ambassador to the US says Russia has used vacuum bombs. Both are banned under the Geneva Convention. In an address to the European Parliament, Ukraine's president accused Russia of targeting civilians.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians. We have a desire to see our children alive. I think it's a fair one. Yesterday, 16 children were killed. Again and again, President Putin is going to say that is some kind of operation and we are hitting a military infrastructure. Where are our children? What kind of military factories do they work at? What tanks are they going with?
We'll keep you up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to Liam with On The Money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:37. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan, on GB News TV and DAB Plus digital radio. Now, over in Wales today, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are celebrating small businesses and local suppliers. To mark St David's Day, the first day of spring, Prince William and Kate are visiting a market in Abergavenny to find out how important local business is to rural communities there. Well, our Wales reporter Lily Hewitson joins us now. Lily, great to see you. Happy St David's Day. Am I allowed to say that as a non-Welsh person?
Yes, of course. Dydd Gwyl Dewi Hapus, Liam. Happy St David's Day. We're in the really busy market town of Abergavenny. We're squeezed into the press hall, and as you can see, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are just leaving the market hall behind me. They've been meeting local traders, chatting about the agricultural industry and the importance of that to the rural population today. We're just squeezed into the press hall. Lots of photographs being taken. Now, this morning they met with representatives of the farming community from across the UK to learn more how the agricultural sector underpins so much of the local economy across the UK. And at the moment, they've just been into the market behind us, learning about how important local suppliers are to rural communities. Now, later on, the Duke and Duchess will be heading to Blaenavon, to a local youth centre which supports over 600 young people in the local area. Now, I've heard their Royal Highnesses have had a go at making some Welsh cakes themselves, which I'm hoping they might well have in their hands there. They're just having a chat to some of the local primary schools, some of the children there. They're waving their Welsh flags. A lot of them are dressed up as Welsh ladies, and they've got their Welsh rugby shirts on today, and they're just crouching behind those children just behind me. So hopefully you may well be able to catch a glimpse of them. There's lots of locals here hoping to see Will and Kate too. So yes, later on they're going to be heading over to Blaenavon to meet some of the locals there, but for now, I think we are heading back to you. But hopefully, if we just keep that camera on, we might be able to see them pop up, because they are chatting to some of the much smaller children from the local primary school there.
Lily Hewitson, two things. The first thing, nice pronunciation on your Welsh there. Grammar's a bit ropey. I'll call you about that later. And also, how nice of William and his wife to wait until you were talking to me before they emerged there. Lily Hewitson there in Abergavenny in Gwent. Now, there's anger and chaos across the country today as commuters on rail and the London Underground are hit with a double blow. Passengers in England and Wales have seen the highest rise in train fares for 9 years. You'll now pay 3.8% more for a ticket. Labour says the rise leaves the average commuter paying around £3,200 for their season ticket. That's 49% more than in 2010. But that's not all for commuters in London. They've also been left in limbo with most tube lines closed as 10,000 London Underground workers from the Rail Maritime and Transport Union, the RMT, on strike in disputes over jobs and pensions. Let's now go to our reporters, Alice Porter, who's at Paddington Station this afternoon in central London, and Bradley Harris, of course, our Northwest correspondent in Manchester at Piccadilly Station. Alice, let's start with you. A double blow for commuters in London. I ended up cycling across London this morning.
I know, it's absolute chaos. I almost didn't get my interview onto the point this morning because it took about 2 hours to drive in. I mean, I don't know if you can see behind me, but there's been a huge row of people who are queuing for buses. I've just gone past Paddington Station, and the queue for people who are trying to get taxis, it is just going back for miles and miles, because as you were saying there, we've got almost half the tube lines are completely suspended and many are completely really not operating at all. So it's causing a huge amount of chaos over the capital. And if anyone's sort of watching this thinking, well, hang on a sec, this feels like this sort of tube strike, this doesn't feel like this has come out of the blue. We've been having tube strikes for a long time. You'd be quite right in saying that. Since November, we've been having ongoing tube strikes because of the night tube being brought back in. But this is a slightly separate issue. This is because we've got about 600 jobs are being cut from TfL, and there's been a huge pushback from unions. TfL saying that people aren't losing their jobs, and in fact what we're seeing is just where there's vacancies, people won't be replaced, but it's had a lot of pushback from unions, and that's why we're having this chaos in the capital today.
Around 3 million people use the tube every day, don't they, Alice? That helps to drive the economy of the capital. We think we've got another tube strike on Thursday. Will it happen?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's talks at the moment, but as it stands on Thursday, there'll be another 24-hour strike on Friday night as well. There's also meant to be closures on the Central line and on the Victoria line. So again, this was the night tube coming back, and the idea that it was going to sort of revitalise the nighttime economy in London. And of course, with these repeated tube strikes, all it does is make TfL's funding crisis, which is really at the heart of this issue. We've of course had huge loss in revenue over the last couple of years because of the pandemic, and it's put TfL's funding in a really, really sticky situation. The government has done another bailout last Friday to the tune of 200 million, but they still have to make many, many more cuts, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing people protesting today.
Water, thank you. Outside Paddington Station in central London. Let's move over now to Bradley Harris at Manchester Piccadilly, a station I know well. Brad, how's news of that almost 4% rise in rail fares on top of a cost of living crisis going down in Manchester?
Yeah, well, Liam, this is one of the biggest train ticket increases that we've seen since 2013. Many people will be waking up this morning who are season ticket holders and seeing how much of an impact this is going to have. This is not only just a bad time for this increase to happen, but also it's going to leave a big impact on not just people who are season ticket holders, but people who are low earners, because let's not forget, a cost of living crisis going on at the minute. Energy prices are going up, your grocery bills are going up, and also petrol prices in the last 24 hours are more than $1.50 a litre. So forget going in the car. If you think public transport's going to be cheaper, well, at the moment there's a price increase. We've been talking about it all day on GB News. It's quite interesting because I've also, Liam, been taking a look at analysis by Campaign for Better Transport. This is really quite staggering, actually. They found that the average full-time worker commuting from Brighton to London would have to work 7 weeks to earn enough money to pay for their annual season ticket, which is now costing £5,302. That's up, Liam, 194 quid compared to last year. I should note, Liam, as well, that there is a statement from the Department of Transport who say that this increase of 3.8% has been capped below the current retail price inflation of 7.8%. So worth mentioning that. That's a statement from the Department for Transport, Liam.
Indeed. We also know the train companies lost huge amounts of money keeping trains running during lockdown to the extent that they did. Bradley Harris there at Manchester Piccadilly on those rail fare increases, and also thanks to Alice Porter in central London outside Paddington Station on those tube strikes. Well, it's time now for my daily interview series, Money Talks, and today's guest is Steve Baker. He's the Tory MP for Wickham and the former Brexit minister. Since entering the House of Commons in 2010, Steve Baker's developed a reputation as a formidable campaigner, someone who can organise and marshal fellow parliamentarians to pressure governments into action. As chair of the European Research Group of Backbench MPs, Baker played a crucial role in ensuring that Brexit legislation was passed by the House of Commons. He's more recently turned his attention to campaigning for ministers to take what he calls a more realistic approach to the net zero agenda, particularly in light of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So here he is, Steve Baker, today's Money Talks. Steve, great to see you here on Money Talks. How big an issue on the Conservative backbenches now among your constituents is the UK's cost of living crisis?
It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for every MP, I think, and it's a huge issue for my constituents. I'm sorry to say the food bank in Wickham has become something of an industrial operation, and that is shaming on the whole welfare state, not just this government. And we need to look after people.
The official data shows CPI inflation, the consumer price index, was 5.5% in January, Do you think that's accurate? Has the cost of living gone up by 5.5% for your constituents over the last year, or by more?
I wouldn't be at all surprised if for some people it's gone up by more. I think that the way we measure inflation and the way we try and control interest rates to control inflation is deeply flawed. I think people will have different experiences of price rises and different abilities to bear those price rises. So particularly, say, the energy price rise that will come. For some people, that energy price rise will be a huge hit to them. The wealthier people probably absorb it. They might not like it, but they'll absorb it very easily. I'm not expecting to struggle to heat my home, for example, on MPs' wages, but many of my constituents will.
And for a lot of lower income, vulnerable households, their spending on heating, on fuel, on food is a huge share of their income. So when those essentials go up, their inflation rate they face, the cost of living rise, is disproportionately high.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that we should therefore be asking the Bank of England to look at how inflation affects different groups quite differently, you know, in terms of, in a sense, the basket of goods that really matters to people every day in ordinary life. You know, the cost of housing, for example, we've ended up looking at owner-occupiers' housing costs. But the truth is people want to buy a house. So, and the prices of houses has been soaring. People want a pension. Well, that means stock market assets. You know, we should be looking at how a much broader basket of goods soars when inflation is created through money creation. And we should be looking at how price rises affect different income groups.
Now, the Bank of England is nominally independent, but the governor is an official paid from the public purse. You are an MP, you're fully entitled to comment. Is he doing a good job?
I have deep-seated problems with the way that the monetary system works. I agree in a nutshell with Walter Bagehot, the original person who wrote a manual on how to run a central bank, and he thought there should be no central banks, but he also thought we were stuck with them, and I agree with him. So I think the problem we've got right now is so huge, it's difficult to compress into a few words. We have ended up with a state spending so much money, it can only do it through the coronavirus crisis. It's only been able to do it because the Bank of England was willing to buy all the bonds, all the government debt that was issued to cope with coronavirus. That's according to the government's own Office for Budget Responsibility. That the implications of that are profound. So the government built a bridge through this crisis, but it didn't do it by borrowing from savers. It did it by borrowing from a bond market where traders knew they could sell those bonds to the Bank of England. What would have happened?
And the Bank of England bought those bonds using newly created money.
New money.
Not printing actual notes, but newly created balances by a computer to buy those bonds. Made up money.
Yeah, and this is an extraordinary phenomenon. In a sense, what it's done is make much clearer what's been happening for years. So between 97 and 2010, to pick some years at random, the money supply tripled. Great big accelerating rush to destruction. Well, the implications of having a monetary system like this, where credit is expanded into, for example, mortgages, and the money supply triples, and then you have a massive crisis in the mortgage market, and financial institutions and the instruments based on mortgages, and then you replace that credit expansion, new money created through lending, with money created through QE.
Quantitative easing.
Quantitative easing, that is direct money creation in reserves by the Bank of England. We've got to start asking some really profound questions about what that means for what I would call social justice. Because I believe in free markets, but free markets are only free and fair and serving society if they operate within certain bounds of just institutions and social processes. And one of those things is your money should mean something. You do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. And yet, while you're doing that, somebody else is getting billions of pounds of new money printed to buy bonds. It's bound to have an effect on the justice of social processes and people's faith in a market economy, in a nutshell, when they're trying to buy a house and the price of that house has soared away.
You and I have talked a lot over the years about these distributional effects of QE, the massive rise in inequality, as you describe, because asset prices have gone up so high, the most visible asset price being the price of a house. So ordinary men and women with regular jobs, hard-working people, can't buy houses the way that their parents could. You'll know that the House of Lords did a report into quantitative easing, a very distinguished group of economists, some of Britain's leading economists in the upper house. They called it a dangerous addiction with a question mark, and the Bank of England governor dismissed that report. There's a very cursory response from the Bank of England and from the Treasury, and the governor focused on the fact that they'd used the word addiction and that might trigger some worried drug addicts. What did you think of that response?
It was a cursory and inadequate response to a very good report. But why? Well, because we're skating on thin ice with, I think, very hot water underneath, and I don't take any pleasure in saying that. We've ended up with, as Andy Haldane, former chief economist of the Bank of England, put it, the biggest bond market bubble in history. What does that mean? It means we've got a problem with the way that government raises its debt, and the prices of bonds have been bid up by the way that the government's operated the financial markets. So now we're in a position where if inflation comes in and stays in, under its current mandate, the Bank of England will have to raise interest rates and taper money creation. That could burst that bond market bubble. And that's my biggest fear right now. Because if they burst that bond market bubble, what's Boris going to do? Is he going to massively slash spending, which of course would be very painful for a lot of people? Or is he going to change the mandate of the Bank of England so that they can keep money creation going while inflation is accelerating, which would also be extremely bad for a lot of people? But at the moment, I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me I'm wrong about all this and that inflation is really going to be transitory, that it's going to drop back to 2% and that this is all going to be okay. In an environment where we've had so much cheap credit for so long, followed by direct money creation, and by all the central banks, by the way, I think we're now on thin ice over hot water, and we better start getting the central banks, forcing the central banks to take seriously the issues you've been raising before we have a really serious problem and don't know what to do.
I think there's a lot in what you say. As you kindly remarked there, I did give evidence to that House of Lords investigation into quantitative easing. We now have a heady brew of very, very overly inflated asset prices for stocks, for bonds. If that bubble collapses, it's going to be front page news for weeks and weeks and weeks, something similar to 2008. Without wishing to be alarmist, that's the situation we're in. It's astonishing to me that more people aren't talking about it. But at least, Steve, people are now starting to talk about the cost of living, something else you've talked about for many, many months. As inflation cranks up, we're facing a cost of living triple whammy in April, aren't we? With that rise in fuel bills, the Ofgem price cap going up by 54% for the average household, with the rise in national insurance contributions, and with inflation hitting 7% on the Bank of England's forecast, probably even more. Surely before that moment happens, because it is the month before crucial local elections in May, the government is going to have to take some kind of action, further action, to temper the impact on ordinary households of that cost of living triple whammy.
You would think that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister would want to U-turn to avoid that triple whammy. You would think that they would want to abandon the national insurance hike, that they would want to take the green levies off energy bills at least, and that they would want to start thinking very hard about inflation and the monetary system. You would think that they would want to U-turn.
That was Conservative MP Steve Baker. You can listen to the full-length, 25-minute version of that interview now on my Money Talks podcast on the GB News YouTube channel or via the GB News app. That's all we've got time for. Thanks for joining me. GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On the Money.
Hello again. It's a sunny day across much of the northern half of the UK. Further south, much more cloud, and particularly southwest England having a very wet Tuesday afternoon. High pressure is dominating, but these weather fronts have never completely cleared away, still draped across East Anglia and the southeast. And as this low moves up, the rain is going to pep up this afternoon for Devon and Cornwall. So turning wetter here. Rain and drizzle on and off from Hampshire up towards parts of East Anglia and down towards Kent, but from the Midlands northwards, most of Wales dry, fine, and certainly North Wales northwards, lots of sunshine, just a few showers across the Northern Isles. Temperatures responding to a bit of sunshine across the north, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 or 11 there in Aberdeen, and 10 Celsius along the south coast of England, 10 for Southampton and Plymouth, but feeling cooler here because of the rain, which will be quite heavy this evening, especially for Devon, Cornwall, parts of Somerset, slowly edging into south and then mid Wales and into parts of the Midlands as we go through the night, and the rain returning to southeast England as well. Elsewhere, most places dry with the clear skies across Scotland, a cold one here. -3, -4 through some sheltered glens further south. We're well above freezing, starting at 6 or 7 in Cardiff and Birmingham. But we will start with cloud and rain here on Wednesday, a dull, damp, pretty dismal day, and that rain will extend to Northern Ireland, so a much soggier day here tomorrow compared to today. Patchy rain for northwest England. Much of eastern England will be dry. Most of Scotland also dry with plenty of sunshine across the Highlands once more. Temperatures, again, high single figures, low double digits in the south, 11 in Cardiff, maybe 10 or 11 in London, but again, feeling cooler with the cloud and the patchy rain, which will continue to drift northwards on Wednesday. More rain creeping in by this stage from the Atlantic as well, bringing many of us a rather drab day on Thursday with persistent rain for Edinburgh and Manchester, which may well linger into Friday. Turning drier but colder into the weekend.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m.